So I'm here today representing RISC Open Limited, who are on the other side of the bar there. And what am I going to talk about? Mostly starting with an update for anyone who's been asleep since the show last year, particularly from Wakefield onwards. So a little bit of an update on some of the bigger things that have happened. Some projects that are coming up in the near future, i.e. things that are currently being worked on and hopefully released in the next few weeks. An introduction, I'll talk about some of the recently opened bounties where you can get involved, or if you don't want to get involved, you can just hand over money. It's a lot easier. So this is winding back to June. Rule released the work that was done for the JPEG bounty. Any scientists amongst you, this is showing a cosine transform with highest resolution pixels in one corner, the DC component in the other corner. That's basically how JPEG works. When you have a photo of a natural scene, it reorganizes all of the pixels so that the ones with the least detail end up in one square and ones with the most detail in the other square. And that allows you to then compress the data a lot easier, because when looking through each of the squares, the data is almost all the same. So it's a lot easier to compress like that, but obviously as a picture it looks total nonsense. But the important thing was, this was one of the previous bounties that was sponsored by people in the rural community. Updating it since the version that Acorn had last worked on, which was roughly 1994 vintage. So, and that's now been updated to support all the newest versions, which particularly if you download JPEGs off the internet, they'll often be in progressive format. And previously that would have just given you the highly unhelpful message, this JPEG is not recognised, and then give up. So you can now load those into any bit of the OS that supports JPEG. So that's things like Paint, Draw, Change MSI. And very specifically, on the 20th of June, Rule celebrated 10 golden years. I found it interesting, Acorn released R through 1987, and their last ROM release was 3.72, which is 1997, so that was also a 10-year window as it happens. So Rule has now exceeded Acorn in its the time for which it has been looking after RISC OS. So it was an important milestone, and you can commemorate that with a wonderful badge available on the stand today. So Rule was originally formed by Ben, who's on the other side of the panel today, Steve, who's not here today, and Andrew, who's now in New Zealand. Basically as a way to save RISC OS from obscurity. So it's kind of a dark period, 2003-ish to 2006, where basically nothing happened at all. A lot of stuff happens in 4 years in computing. RISC OS lost a lot of time there. So a bit later in the year, October, we released a new version of the NutPy. So for anyone who doesn't know, that is a collection of commercial applications suitable for, or cut down to use to work on the Raspberry Pi. There's roughly £600 worth of software if you were to go around and buy each of the titles individually, and that's available a special Pi only version for £35 plus VAT. About £30 is going back out to the developers. I don't have the exact figures, so I just rounded up slightly from when I last did this talk. Roughly £20,000 has been redistributed out to those developers. So it's not only has it given a large audience of Pi owners something to add applications to their Pi, it's also given a lot of cash back into the developers. So back in January, there was a new version of the desktop development environment, that's the DDE. Mostly this was catching up some of the zero-page protection problems that the original DDE had. This was primarily a fix to sort those out. So anyone who had an existing license, so DDE 26 was the previous version, got this version for free. There was also a new version of the ABC compiler. A new version of the ABC compiler which generates code suitable for the newer versions of the ARM processor, ARMv7 and ARMv8, and a whole new user guide. I think it's about 90 pages it used to have a 10-page guide, so it didn't really tell you a lot of the nitty-gritty internal features. So, for example, you can actually use ABC to write modules in BASIC. So that's quite a major update to the manual. Now, you don't have to be an owner of the DDE to get your hands on that newer ABC compiler and the manual. If you go to the riscos.fr, the French RISCOS website, there's a competition there where you can submit a picture of your desktop. You will get a free copy of the ABC compiler and manual back by email. So that's an initiative being run by David Fugi in France, who is very eager to get people coding, particularly in BASIC. So this was earlier in the month. There's a new version of the PICO for the Raspberry Pi, a very cut-down version of RISCOS that just contains the command line and BBC Basic. So when you turn it on, it even goes bit like a BBC Micro used to do and leads you straight to the basic command prompt ready to start writing. There's also various examples on the card, and if you've had a play with the robot arm on the far end of our stand today, you have been using a program called Nano Arm that's included on the PICO to control the bright yellow Macklin grabber robot. And it's so small, hence the name PICO, that it actually fits on pretty much any of your junk SD cards in your drawer. So you've probably got a card that's at least 16 megabytes, so you can make use of PICO straight away. Go to the RULE website, on the downloads page, click on the Raspberry Pi logo, and PICO is there, just unzip it. Just yesterday, very late at night, the final testing on the EDID bounty was finished. The idea of EDID is to banish all of the black art involved in editing mode definition files. The idea is that on startup, RISCOS will read the monitor, even if you've changed the monitor since you last booted up. So it could be an entirely different monitor. It will read all that information in, work out which is the best screen mode to use, and switch into that mode. Again, in the next week or so, there'll be an updated configure plugin as well, so that you can use the monitor setup to select that as the preferred way of working. If you really still enjoy writing MDFs yourself, you can still do it the hard way, and you can still select MDFs. That functionality isn't going away, but definitely our suggestion would be to choose the automatic, auto-detected one and stop fiddling around with MDFs. They're far too complicated. Things are inching slowly towards a new version of a disk image for the Raspberry Pi. So the last one, which is unmemorably named RC14, came out in February 2015, so just over 2 years ago. Pi 2 was the reason why we did the previous update 2 years ago, but sneakily the Pi 2 is now shipped with an entirely different processor. It's the same circuit board, and it still says copyright 2014 on it, but if you look carefully at the writing, they've entirely changed the processor to be, it's actually now a 64-bit processor. Software incompatibility has gone up because ARM have sneakily removed SWP. Doesn't mean anything to you. It's short for swap. It's one of the opcodes that the ARM knows, and they've removed that instruction entirely. So when we had 32-bit processors, swap was used to do atomic exchanges between memory and registers, which you would normally do for semaphoring. So in software, if you want to communicate between two applications where they're both fighting for the same bit of resource, only one person can hold the semaphore at once. But ARM have removed that now in the 64-bit processors, and that's caused a problem for quite a few third-party applications where swap is being used. Three things that we think we're waiting for are the GhostScript printer driver, the PDF reader, and we think the FAT32 filing system as well. I think those are the only three things where we've not seen updated versions fixing that problem. As soon as we've got those three, we're ready to go for a new version of the Raspberry Pi, which will build on that work from the PICO. Almost everything that was done for the PICO a couple of slides earlier is the exact same software that will be used in that. So it's kind of the PICO that we released in the last week or so is kind of a proving ground or a test ground for this new Pi update. And we're very much hoping this is fatal last words, last release candidate ever. So obviously RC14, there were 13 that preceded it. So hopefully this will be the last one, and at that point it will be sensible to release a stable version, or award the stable badge to the Raspberry Pi. At the moment, our belief is, so we're waiting for 3 things for the release candidate, and the only thing between that and a stable release is some work that's being done on the USB driver, which is in one of the other bounties that has just been started. So that was last updated for RISC-OS 3.6 when the RISC PC came out. Which was amazingly 21 years ago. So there's no mention at all of the internet or email or anything like that in it. It's very much Dark Ages text. So there's a heck of a lot of outdated material in the user guide. Obviously there's a lot of things that have gone by the wayside. I don't think anyone here probably uses photo CDs anymore. So the chapter on photo CDs is largely irrelevant now. It's been got rid of. So if there are any people who are good at writing English or good at proofreading, there are 23 chapters left to go on the update. A lot of the chapters are quite easy ones to edit, so if you're not feeling like writing any programs or programming your Pico in BASIC and you just want to do a bit of proofreading, we're always after volunteers to help finish the new user guide. If you're feeling brave, there's a computer somewhere dedicated to generating new ROM images every morning. So if you want to help test out some of the more recent changes, then that's the best place to go and get those from the downloads page on Rule's website. And you can also sign up to do regular donations there. So if you want to give, say, £5 a month, which that's £60 a year, which probably most people wouldn't miss. But it goes to funding sorts of things like attending shows and running the auto builder in California. Anyway, more important, the exciting new bounties. 3 new bounties have just been opened last week. So, having completed the JPEG and EDID bounties, as I mentioned a few slides earlier, things were looking a bit sparse in the bounty land. So the USB one is underway, and that's obviously working towards the stable release for the Raspberry Pi. And there's also an update to Paint to add some new tools and zoom features and better spray canning, fix some bugs. So those 2 are both currently going. There are 3 new ones just opened. I'll give you a very quick outline of what they're about. So the first one is extending clipboard support. So in RISC-OS 5.22, Chris Evans generously sponsored updating Edit to support Control-C, Control-V to cut and paste within Edit and between other applications that support the clipboard. Probably the other main keyboard-driven application that RISC-OS ships with is Draw, and at the moment that doesn't support a clipboard, so you can't, for example, select a drawing that you've done in Draw and paste it into TechWriter, for example, or vice versa. So that's one of the main applications that we'd like to switch over to using the clipboard. So you'd also be able to then write text in Edit, copy the text from Edit into Draw, and also for the window manager, wherever you have a writable icon in your desktop, you would be able to cut and paste the text out of that icon and have it appear in a text editor, or vice versa. So those are the 2 big chunks of work that we'd like to cover in updating the clipboard. The second one is to do with the TCP/IP stack, which is the internet stack. It's a different way of describing it, and that dates back from 1997. So it's kind of 20 years old and looking a bit long in the tooth, particularly as the internet has got a lot bigger and scarier in those intervening 20 years. So this first update is it's one of 4. It's a pretty big piece of work. If you were to try and do all of the work in one run, it's about 8 months worth of full-time work, and that's very unlikely that you'll find someone who's going to do that all in one big chunk. So we've divvied it up into 4 smaller ones, which are hopefully a bit more bite-sized. The first one is patching up some security. There are some known security holes in the internet stack and the protocols that it supports already. So since they're unused protocols, we're just going to delete those. And the main chunk of work there is to update the SSL support, because a lot of applications and web browsers, things that try and fetch images in the background, so the map program, RISC OS-N, if you hover the mouse over the map there, it will try and fetch a photo of that part of the country, but that requires HTTPS, so the secure version of HTTP. And at the moment we don't have any up-to-date SSL modules to do secure transactions over the internet at all in RISC OS. They're all either hideously out of date, i.e. more than 15 years, or they're full of bugs. So our aim is to get something that can be updated a lot more easily, so it's every night a new security module pops out of the auto builder, which you can have on your computer. So if there's any big security flaws or bank break-ins that get announced on the news the following morning, you could have a fix for that. So that's step one. Steps 2, 3 and 4 are to do with updating the underlying network modules and all of the commands that come on disk. And once you've got that in place, you'll then be able to, not sure which way around is the more exciting way around, add Wi-Fi support, which depends on a lot of new network security protocols, and IPv6, because we ran out of network addresses about 2 years ago. And the last bounty that we've just opened as well builds on the bounty that's currently underway, and that's to do with adding any of the features that the NetBSD guys have added to theirs. So all of the USB support in RISC OS comes from a different operating system, a Unix operating system called NetBSD, but that work again is lagging quite a lot. It was last ported in 2001. That was the last main update there. So there's a lot of new features that we quite like in there, like isochronous audio support, so you can stream sound in and out of the system. USB 3 has just started coming into NetBSD, so you can get much faster data rates. And we don't currently have any access to that because our port is so out of date. And on that note, I'll stop rattling, and if anyone has any questions, I'll try and ask them, or I'll go and ask Ben if he knows the answer. Right, see the guy in red jacket.
What's the status on dual monitor support for hardware such as the titanium which has it?
So yeah, the dual monitor support status. So in case anyone hasn't seen the demo on the stand, there's a version of RISC OS running on titanium which has 2 video outputs, allowing you to have 2 video heads, so a very wide screen. So the status of that particular one is the driver is complete, in that talking to the hardware is done, but at the moment the OS doesn't really know that it's on 2 monitors. The trick with the driver is it pretends it's one really wide screen, when actually it's 2 distinct ones. So when you open a dialog box that should be centered on the screen, what actually happens is it centers it across the split line between the 2 monitors, which gets a bit annoying. So yeah, we need some new APIs, particularly in the window manager, so that you can say, actually I want to open a window on the center of the screen that my mouse is currently on, for example, which would probably be the most logical one, because wherever the mouse is probably where your eyeballs are, so that would be the sensible one to center it on. There are other policies that you can adopt. For example, if you had an error box, you might choose to open that on a monitor that you designate as your primary monitor. There's different rules. So yeah, in terms of RISC OS, it doesn't currently know that it's really 2 monitors. Switching to my LSR hat briefly, I have been discussing it with Jeffrey Lee as to how best to introduce these new APIs, because yes, there'll need to be some updates. And similarly, the screen setup plugin, you probably want to have a version that shows you is it left or right, which orientational things are, and that will require something more sophisticated than what we currently have, which is just to set the screen mode and the colour depth. Yes, there'll need to be changes to that.
If you're using 2 screens and you're sharing one of the screens with, say, a Raspberry Pi on a different input like HDMI as opposed to the DVIs that those 2 screens are in, is that going to work?
So the question there was if you were to have a 2-monitor setup that was a 2-head on one computer, and then you had a Raspberry Pi as a second computer.
Going into one of the screens.
If you were to switch to the 1-head version, what would happen to the other half of the other version? That's what you're saying. Yeah. I can think that would work. So the thing that would help you there is if the EDID, if the monitor detection supported hot plugging, which is another bit of technology that builds on top of EDID. So I don't know if you noticed when I plugged my laptop in, the laptop screen went blank and the monitor came on, and then I pressed a button and I've now got the second copy on my laptop. So it's that sort of thing. It's detecting the fact, electrically it's very simple to detect because there's resistors at the end of the cable. So you know when something has been plugged in, and you could use that as a trigger to switch the 2-head one back to a half. You see what I mean? And then you would see your Raspberry Pi on the second screen. So the short answer is it's technically entirely feasible. I think the important bit that you're missing is hot plug.
Are you mentioning control keys in edit? So control S in the switch case?
Control S does toggle case.
Oh, it does?
Yeah. The video, yes. The question was, does control S change the case in edit? Yeah.
As of version?
1 point something. It was at the same time as the clipboard. Support went in, and another feature at the same time was Control S to set or toggle the case. Yeah, that was an easy one. More questions like that, where it's already happened.
Something to say about the dropping of 0 pay waiting for security purposes.
Oh, I see. So the question is, as I've just mentioned there, the SSL, none of the SSL solutions are currently either up to date or they're all chock full of bugs. And yes, they're being tripped up by the 0-page relocation. So I think the thing that I've said on a previous occasion is there's possibly some intermediate step where you still allow 0-page access or accidental accesses, but you return some bogus number. So what we're trying to weed out here is people intentionally reading 0-page, and there are some classes of application which used to repeatedly access the timer, which is hidden down in those low memory addresses, and that's been forbidden since forever. RISC 3.1 probably forbidden doing that, but people were still doing it. And we need to move the reason we're wanting to move the workspace is because when you have a multi-core processor, you effectively have multiple copies of RISC OS running, and each one will have its own copy of its workspace. So you can no longer have one set of workspace; you need to have several sets. So the first part of the motivation of moving 0-page is to allow us to do multi-core work, so we can have lots of different copies of RISC OS running on one computer. And then the second part is about forbidding it because programming-wise, it's a bug. You should never access address 0. It's a plain and simple bug. So the 2-step way of implementing that would be to just move the workspace today, but leave 0-page still existing, and just have it return some hilarious hexadecimal constant like coffee, C0FFED or something like that. So applications that accidentally access 0-page wouldn't crash or abort. So you could still limp along with your hideously out-of-date SSL implementation, but it wouldn't crash. And yet the OS workspace has moved somewhere else. So I don't think that's setting up in stone yet to be able to give you a definitive answer on, but that's an example of a solution.
Just thinking that there's likely to be a gap between that development and...
Exactly, yes. So trying to be sensitive. When RISC OS 5.24 comes out, the 0-page relocation is going to get more permanent and more real, but there are some intervening, there are pragmatic stepping stone ways of solving it.
Got a GPIO module now in the source code repository that relies on a HAL to tell it where everything is so that it just works in the same way on every platform. And that's built into the Pico ROMs now. Is it going to be built into the Pi, the BeagleBoard and the PandaBoard daily builds?
Right, so Chris is asking about one of the changes that went in with Pico was we moved the hardware, the low-level hardware accesses for the GPIO header. One of the pictures somewhere. Yeah, there we go. So this GPIO header, if you want to access that from BASIC, you use the GPIO slice. And previously, the way that was arranged was there was a GPIO module that directly poked into the registers in the main Raspberry Pi processor. But we've changed the way that's done by sawing it in half and moving the register accesses into the hardware abstraction layer, into the HAL, which then means we have only one GPIO module to maintain, which is a lot simpler to maintain the code. So at the moment, that HAL half that we've sawn off only exists for the Pi. So the code exists in the world to do the Beagle board and the Panda board and even the Titanium and so on, but at the moment the code's in the wrong place. The code is in the old version of the module. So there is some work to be done to transplant the hardware, the register poking code into the respective HAL. And at that point the GPIO module will then automatically start working with those other platforms.
Can it be put in the daily Pi builds from now though? There's no reason not to include it in the Pi daily build ROMs.
No particular one? Yeah, I think you asked a very similar question to me yesterday. And
yeah, well, I'm asking you in front of everyone now.
Asking publicly in the hope that you'll get a different answer. The answer was no one could remember why it's not in the ROM, and so that's the answer.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
There was probably a reason 3 years ago, and yes, at the time it did only work on a limited number of Pis, and this most recent change to Pico means that it runs on every model everywhere, so maybe that was the restriction.
I think Jeffrey is sort of saying there's not any problem in multi-core supporting. So, but there's been some discussion about the access to that sort of going forward after 5.2 for the moment, but going builds include zero pain, but that may be more restricted because of the nature of change. What's the thoughts or rules on that? And secondly, is some of the bounties that are going on, like the USB stack and the network stack, would they have in mind if they could run on a separate core in this multi-core element? So some of the underlying work may get moved over into that area as well.
Yeah. Okay. I'll paraphrase what you just said. So you're asking for multi-core support in the future. So the two parts is what would happen to the nightly or the daily builds that go out, and also any of the current work in progress for the bounties. How would that be impacted by multi-core? I think those are the two things you're asking. Okay. So I think probably there's always, from a software point of view, there's a point at which you hold your finger by the trigger and decide, well, should I check this in? Is it a load of old rubbish? Is it going to crash horribly? I suspect that probably the simplest solution there is to have a set of parallel builds, so that people wanting to update their computers on a daily basis just to take the general bug fixes or the general improvements or general new features can carry on the single core version. And then there'll be perhaps a subset for, at the moment the multi-core stuff only works on a Raspberry Pi anyway, so it will be reasonably simple to have a separate Pi only, multi-core only. But for people who don't want to take that or aren't interested in the multi-core stuff today, they could then carry on using the still reasonably good daily builds. Yeah. Exactly. In the case of a Pi, it's a SD card, so if it doesn't work, it can't work. Yes, but in the case of some of the other machines, so for example, the Panda board has two Cortex A9 cores in it, so you could have a separate download for that. So that's probably the sensible thing to do, is to keep them going in parallel. Because multi-core is not going to be an overnight bang, suddenly, oh no, suddenly it works. Oh, why were we not doing this yesterday? That's not how it's going to work. It's going to be, there's a large amount of APIs need extending or fixing. If you think there's usually about 130-ish modules in each version of RISC OS, and of those, I guess probably at least 60 or so are going to end up having some multi-core contention of some sort. They're going to have to be updated in some way to be aware that multiple clients are trying to talk to them. There's a lot of groundwork to do here. Don't expect to wake up one morning and it's been checked in and it's all finished. It's going to be a number of years before you get something that's a usable and stable multi-core OS. There's a lot of groundwork to do there. And the second question was, how are the existing bounties taking that sort of thing into account? Yeah, they're definitely all watching with an eye to the future. So the EDID work, for example, although currently, we asked a question a moment ago about multiple heads. So although multiple head is seen on the horizon, the EDID work that's just been done doesn't support multiple heads, but it has been written with multiple heads in mind. So all the star commands, there's a space where you can add the head number. All the menus have spaces where you could have extra heads described. The way that the monitor definitions are selected all understand how multiple heads work, but don't currently do anything with it. I think the same thing is happening with any of the other bounties that are in progress. Is if it's new work that you're working on, then you must use APIs or must use programming techniques that are going to work when multi-core happens, because otherwise it's wasted work.
In the work on USB, is there anything, sort of, this is a very general question, on sound devices and USB to HDMI, display adapters in other words? Is there anything being considered in either of those areas?
Yeah, so you're asking for USB about either sound support and HDMI or video output support. Yeah, so the second one's the easiest one to answer because there is a prototype version that uses the DisplayLink hardware to allow you to have multiple heads using a USB to DVI or USB to HDMI adapter made by DisplayLink, a Cambridge company. So that was very much in a prototype stage, as in it worked, but it was quite slow if you were moving windows around because some of the protocols required to send the screen updates are proprietary, so you don't really know how you're supposed to send the messages. So yes, so the second answer is yes, that's sort of supported. The reason why that's been put on hold is to allow some changes to the way the memory is laid out. It's partly coming back to the zero page stuff, but the way the memory is laid out to allow you to know which bits of the screen have been updated. So when you move a window around, there's no point in sending the whole screen again. You might as well just send little bits that are moving, and that makes it a lot cheaper to send over a slower link like a USB or a network link. So yeah, that's kind of installed, but not for a USB reason.
Right.
The first part of the question, the audio support, yes, that's very specifically in the bounty that has just opened to do with integrating. There is some iSocket support lying around in the code, but it sort of works, but not quite. And we want to close the loop with the NetBSD Foundation because they have also fixed some stuff in that area, and we've fixed some stuff in that area, but our fixes are in the 2001 version, and their fixes are in the 2017 version, and they don't really fit together anymore. So we've ended up with the worst possible situation where we've started from a piece of open source software and we've wandered off at such a tangent we now can't make any use of the headset here, the main one that lots of people are working on. So essentially, yeah, if there's a wiggly way of doing it with my hands, we've ended up going off in this direction, and what we need to do is steer back here. So when we get back to the version that the NetBSD guys are using, then we get fixes almost for free. There's hundreds of NetBSD developers, and it's all written in C, so as long as they're fixing bugs in their version, we can just borrow those back again. The problem is that we've got stuck over here. It's the same problem with the JPEG. JPEG was started from the standard version in 1994, and we wandered off in a direction and stopped updating it, and we got stuck in an island or a T-junction, no through road. And a lot of these bounties are about bringing us back to the common version. So the USB, the network stack work is exactly the same. The whole of the network stack came from FreeBSD, but we wandered off in 1997 and we got stuck off somewhere on the edge of the map, and we need to spend some money coming back on the map again so that we can get up to date. Run out of hands. So thank you very much for your time.